The 1986 EDSA Revolution, the peaceful overthrow of a dictatorship in the Philippines. In the mid-1980s, the Philippines was on the brink of one of the greatest political storms in its history. This storm would dismantle the authority of Ferdinand Marcos, the dictator who had ruled the country with an iron fist for over 2 decades, and showcase the power of the people to the world. Crushed under corruption, human rights abuses, and an economic crisis, the Filipino people had reached the end of their patience. This critical turning point would be crossed with the 1986 EDSA Revolution, also known as the People Power Revolution. This revolution did not just topple a regime, it became a symbol of peaceful struggle against authoritarian rule. So, how was a deep-rooted leader like Marcos overthrown? What were the underlying dynamics of this process? And why did this revolution resonate not only in the Philippines, but across the globe? The answer lies in a complex story that stretches from a dictator's rise and fall to a chain reaction ignited by an assassination and the key role of international pressure. When Ferdinand Marcos was elected president of the Philippines in 1965, he was seen as a beacon of hope. A young, charismatic, and intelligent leader, Marcos garnered immense support with his promises of reform and economic development plans. His first term saw significant progress in infrastructure projects, including the construction of roads, bridges, and public buildings, which contributed to the country's modernization. This success led him to win a second term in 1969. However, this victory only fueled his political ambitions. Over time, Marcos's style of governance began to change. His promises were gradually replaced by repression, corruption, and an authoritarian approach. His family and close circle began to exploit state resources for their own gain. His wife and First Lady, Imelda Marcos, drew public anger with her lavish spending of millions of dollars. Her collection of thousands of pairs of shoes, jewelry, and art in the palace stood in stark contrast to the poverty of the people. In 1972, Marcos's authoritarian tendencies reached their peak. Using escalating student protests and a communist insurgency as a pretext, he declared martial law. This move was an opportunity for him to consolidate power. Parliament was dissolved, political opponents were arrested, and censorship was tightened on the press and media. Civil liberties were suspended, and thousands were subjected to extrajudicial killings, torture, and forced disappearances. Marcos was no longer just a president, he was the sole ruler of the Philippines. Yet, this dark period did not completely extinguish the spirit of resistance among the people. The Catholic Church, opposition students, and some brave activists began to raise their voices against the Marcos regime, both underground and openly. These small acts of resistance laid the groundwork for the great uprising to come. The most symbolic figure of the resistance against the Marcos regime was the exiled opposition leader, Benigno Aquino Jr. Nino was Marcos's biggest political rival and had become a hero to the people for his stand against the dictatorship. In 1983, he decided to return to his homeland. He believed the Marcos regime was weakening and that the people were ready for change. However, this return, instead of bringing hope, turned into a tragedy. On August 21, 1983, Nino Aquino's plane landed at Manila International Airport. As he walked among the soldiers waiting on the tarmac, he was shot and killed from behind. While the regime attempted to blame the assassination on communist insurgents, the people knew the truth. This assassination was the final straw. Nino's funeral turned into a massive protest rally against the regime. Tens, even hundreds of thousands of people poured into the streets following the car carrying Nino's coffin. This was not just a funeral, it was the beginning of a massive revolt that broke the silence of the people against Marcos. The assassination resonated not only in the Philippines, but worldwide, once again exposing the brutal face of the Marcos regime and leading to increased international pressure. During the Cold War, the Philippines held strategic importance for the United States. Due to its military bases in the Asia-Pacific and its geographical location, the Marcos regime had long been supported by Washington. However, the The assassination of Nino Aquino and the regime's human rights abuses began to make this support questionable. Pressure from the American public and Congress forced the Reagan administration to adopt a more critical stance towards Marcos. The U.S. began to pressure Marcos to make a choice, either democratize or be completely isolated internationally. Under this pressure, Marcos decided to hold snap elections in 1986. This election was seen as an opportunity for him to regain legitimacy and consolidate his authority. But Marcos was faced with an unexpected opponent, Nino Aquino's wife, Corazon Aquino. Known as a housewife with no political experience, Cori became a symbol of honesty and hope in the eyes of the public. Millions of Filipinos rallied around her, and the election became not just a contest between leaders, but a struggle between a dictatorship and the will of the people. On election day, the Marcos regime's deceptions were in full force. Voting machines broke down, poll workers were threatened, fake ballots were printed, and the results were manipulated. According to the official results, Marcos had won by a large margin, but the people knew this was not the truth. The computer operators tasked with overseeing the election boldly resigned on live television, openly declaring the massive fraud. This courageous act brought the public's anger to a boiling point, and the people would no longer remain silent. The 1986 election fraud was the final straw. On February 22, 1986, some key figures within Marcos's own military declared they would no longer serve the dictatorship. Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile and Armed Forces Vice Chief of Staff Fidel Ramos announced their defection against Marcos. This event became the first spark of the revolution. The people responded to the call of Enrile and Ramos. Epifanio de los Santos Avenue in Manila became the epicenter of a massive protest, with millions of people gathering. But these protesters carried no weapons. Their greatest weapons were their faith, determination, and unity. Priests, nuns, students, housewives, and children took to the streets to stand against the tanks and soldiers loyal to Marcos. This scene captured the attention of the entire world. The people placed flowers on the tanks, prayed for the soldiers, and offered them food and water. They held collective prayers and sang songs on the highway. Television and radio stations broadcast this incredible peaceful resistance live. A large part of the military sided with the people, and the revolution ended in a bloodless victory. A civil war had been narrowly avoided. This revolution proved that it was possible to topple a dictatorship without resorting to violence. The peaceful resistance of the Filipino people further intensified international pressure on Marcos. The U.S. explicitly stated that it would no longer support Marcos and urged him to step down. On February 25, 1986, with a plane sent by the U.S., Ferdinand and his family were sent into exile in Hawaii. After Marcos's ousting, the people entered Malacañang Palace. The site inside revealed the true extent of the corruption. Imelda Marcos's collection included thousands of pairs of shoes, jewelry, and millions of dollars worth of art and cash. This extravagance was a bitter testament to how the Marcos regime had enriched itself at the expense of the people. Immediately after Marcos's departure, Corazon Aquino was sworn in as the first female president of the Philippines. This was not just a change of power, but also the beginning of the Philippines' democratization process. Under Cori's leadership, the Constitution was rewritten, political prisoners were freed, censorship was lifted, and commissions were established to investigate human rights abuses. The EDSA Revolution was a new hope and a fresh start for the Philippines. However, this process was not without its difficulties. The Marcos family and their supporters remained out of politics for a long time. But starting in the 2000s, the Marcos family slowly began to return to the political scene. Ferdinand Marcos's son, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., gradually rose through his political career, and in 2022, he was elected to the very office his father was ousted from. Bongbong Marcos's rise to power, for many, signifies the erasure of the gains of the EDSA revolution. The family has referred to his father's dictatorship as a golden age and denied the corruption allegations. This has deepened political polarization in the country. However, many Filipinos believe that the spirit of the revolution is still alive. The anniversary of EDSA is commemorated every year, reminding people that the power of the people is the greatest weapon against dictatorship. The 1986 EDSA revolution was not just the overthrow of a dictator, it was the saga of a people's courage to change their destiny through peaceful means. It was a miracle where women, priests, children, and the elderly stood hand in hand against tanks, where prayers and determination made even weapons retreat. This revolution introduced the concept of people power to history. It showed the world that it is possible to topple a regime through peaceful civil resistance without resorting to violence. Today, it continues to be a source of inspiration for people fighting